Hello everybody, I am Evelil and I will tell you one story of a good viewing. It was a quiet evening in Rome and the air hummed with an eerie stillness. The Vatican stood as a monument to faith, its ancient walls whispering stories of centuries past. But deep beneath the marble floors, hidden in a vault no one spoke of, there lay something much darker, something even the most devout priests dared not speak of. Father Ambrosio had heard the rumors for years. The forbidden gospel. A text so ancient, so powerful that its existence was a closely guarded secret. He was no stranger to the dark corners of the Vatican. As an archivist, he had spent more nights in the shadowy halls of the archives than he had in the comfort of his own bed. But the forbidden gospel was something he had never truly believed in until now. Ambrosio had been approached by Cardinal Vescari, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was only surpassed by his zeal for the Church. The cardinal had summoned him in the dead of night, his face pale and etched with anxiety. "Father Ambrosio," the cardinal had said in a low voice, his eyes darting around as if they were being watched. "There is something you must understand. The Vatican is not what it seems. There is a text, a gospel, that cannot be read by most. It is not meant for public eyes, but it is real, and it must remain hidden." At the time, Ambrosio had brushed it off as the ramblings of an old man. But then, the cardinal had given him a single page. The paper was old, the ink smudged in places as if time itself had tried to erase it. "Find it," the cardinal had whispered, "before it's too late." Ambrosio had kept the page hidden in his study, unable to understand its contents. But as the days passed, he began to notice something strange. Each night, the page seemed to change. The symbols that had once been incomprehensible started to shift, rearranging themselves, forming patterns that gnawed at his mind. The words were faint at first, but gradually they became clearer. The forbidden gospel was real and it was alive. It was then that Ambrosio made a fateful decision: he would find the rest of the gospel. The question gnawed at him: why would the Vatican keep such a thing hidden for so long? What power did it hold? And why were only a select few able to read it? The answers, he feared, were darker than he could imagine. The archives beneath the Vatican were a labyrinth, vast and winding. The shelves groaned under the weight of ancient manuscripts, each one carefully preserved, each one holding secrets that had been hidden for centuries. But the deeper Ambrosio descended, the more the air seemed to grow thick with an unseen presence. He had followed the whispers of the text, each clue leading him farther into the bowels of the library. Finally, he reached a door unlike any he had ever seen. It was old, made of dark wood that seemed to absorb the light around it, and it was sealed shut with a massive iron lock. There was no sign, no indication of what lay behind it, but Ambrosio knew. He placed the single page he had been given against the door, and for a moment nothing happened. Then, as if it had a life of its own, the page began to tremble. The symbols on it flared to life, shifting and rearranging, pulsing with a dark energy. The lock clicked open and the door creaked inward. Inside was a room, small but filled with books, thousands of them, all arranged in no particular order. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, but there was something more. A feeling like being watched, like something was waiting for him. At the far end of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it lay a single book. The cover was dark, almost black, with no title, no markings. Ambrosio's hand trembled as he approached it, a strange sense of dread creeping over him. He had been told that no one had ever returned from reading the gospel, that those who sought its knowledge were forever lost to it. But he had to know. He had to understand. With a deep breath, he opened the book. The pages inside were blank, at first. But then, slowly, the words began to appear, strange, twisting symbols that seemed to shift and writhe on the page. They were like nothing Ambrosio had ever seen before. His mind recoiled at the sight, but something drew him in, a compulsion that was impossible to resist. He began to read. The words were not in any language he had ever encountered, yet they made perfect sense. Each sentence seemed to tear at the fabric of reality, each word revealing horrors that defied explanation. He read of ancient beings, creatures older than time itself, whose names could not be spoken, whose very presence twisted the world around them. He read of rituals, forbidden rites that could tear apart the very soul, and of a dark force that lay dormant, waiting to be awakened. But as he read, something began to change. The room seemed to grow colder, and shadows began to move around him. He felt a strange pressure in his chest, as if something was pushing against him, forcing him to read faster. The words on the page became clearer, more insistent, as if they were speaking directly to him. "Do you wish to know?" a voice whispered, not in his ears, but in his mind. It was a voice ancient and cold, a voice that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the room. "Do you seek the truth, Father Ambrosio?" Ambrosio's heart raced. His eyes burned from the words on the page, but he couldn't stop reading. It was as if the gospel itself was pulling him deeper, dragging him into its dark embrace. His hands shook as he turned the page, desperate to understand, to grasp the truth. But the truth was not what he expected. The next page was not filled with text. Instead, it was a single, horrifying image, an image of a monstrous, writhing form, its body made of shifting shadows and eyes that seemed to stare directly at him. The creature's mouth was open, and from it came a torrent of words, a language that no human ear had ever heard. Ambrosio recoiled, dropping the book in terror. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in around him. The shadows in the corners of the room began to stretch and writhe, twisting into shapes that defied logic. He heard the faintest whispers, voices calling to him from the darkness. The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening crash. And then the whispers began. "You are ours now." The voices were everywhere, inside his head, crawling under his skin. "You have seen. You have read. Now you will serve." Ambrosio's breath came in shallow gasps as he backed away from the book, but it was no use. The shadows were closing in. The room was alive, pulsing with an unnatural energy. He could hear the creature's voice now, growing louder, demanding to be heard. "You will never leave," it whispered. Suddenly, the book leapt from the pedestal, hovering in the air before him. It flipped open to a page covered in strange, jagged symbols that burned into his vision. He felt his body betray him as his hands moved of their own accord, reaching for the book, pulling it toward him. And then the room went black. Father Ambrosio awoke in his bed, drenched in sweat. His heart pounded in his chest and his mind raced with the horrors he had seen. It had been a dream. It had to have been. But the feeling lingered, something dark and suffocating, a presence that would not let go. He tried to shake off the images, the whispers, but deep down, he knew the truth. The forbidden gospel was not just a book. It was a door, one that should never have been opened. And now something was coming. Something that would not stop until it claimed him, body and soul. The whispers had already begun again. Ambrosio sat up in his bed, drenched in cold sweat, his chest heaving with each shallow breath. The room around him was still, yet it felt heavy, as if the air itself had been thickened by an unseen presence. The shadows clung to the corners, stretching and pulsating, as if waiting for something or someone to acknowledge them. His hands trembled as he wiped his face, but the images of the creature, the twisted symbols, and the voice still echoed in his mind, louder than ever. "You will never leave." The whisper was not from within the walls. It came from his very own thoughts, as if the darkness had taken root inside his mind. Ambrosio shuddered, the terror rising in him again, but he had to know more. What was the gospel? What did it truly mean? And why had it sought him out? He rose from the bed, his legs unsteady beneath him, and moved toward the desk where he had placed the page given to him by Cardinal Vescari. He had hoped it was a dream, a hallucination brought on by the stress of his work, but the moment his fingers brushed the yellowed edge of the paper, he knew the truth. The symbols, the shifting text, they were real. And they were pulling him deeper into something far darker than he had ever imagined. With a grim determination, Ambrosio left his quarters, the weight of the gospel's secret pressing down on him. The corridors of the Vatican were quiet, the flickering torches casting long shadows on the stone walls. His footsteps echoed unervingly as he walked through the hallways, past locked doors and hidden chambers, to the archives below. As he descended into the vaults, a cold draft swept through the narrow passageways, the sound of his footsteps growing muffled as if the air itself were closing in around him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from the shadows, a presence so ancient and malevolent that it seemed to distort reality itself. The door to the hidden room was open, slightly ajar, the darkened interior beckoning him like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. He pushed it open, the creak of the hinges like the groan of some ancient creature disturbed from its slumber. The book was gone. The pedestal sat empty, but the room was not as he had left it. The shelves, once orderly, were now in disarray, their contents scattered across the floor as though something had torn through them in a frenzy. The air was thick with a metallic scent, and the floor was stained with dark, viscous patches, the remnants of some unholy presence. "It's not over." The voice whispered again, this time louder, more insistent. Ambrosio's heart skipped a beat as he turned to face the far wall. There, etched into the stone, were the same jagged symbols from the pages of the forbidden gospel. They glowed faintly, pulsating with an unnatural light that seemed to crawl under his skin. His pulse raced. The book wasn't just a text, it was a portal. A key to something far worse than he could have imagined. The gospel was a living thing, feeding on the fear and curiosity of those who dared to seek its knowledge. And now it had claimed him. He heard a noise behind him, a low scraping sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Ambrosio spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, thickening and warping. Something was there. Something ancient, something hungry. In the darkness, two glowing eyes appeared, staring directly at him. The creature was close now, its presence so oppressive that it felt as though the very air was being suffocated by it. It was a thing of shadows and distortion, its form shifting like liquid darkness, tendrils of smoke and flickers of unnatural light curling around it. "You sought us out," the voice hissed, and this time it was not a whisper. It was the voice of the creature itself, resonating in Ambrosio's mind, reverberating in his very bones. "And now you belong to us." Ambrosio tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. His legs were frozen, rooted to the floor by the unrelenting pressure of the creature's gaze. The shadows closed in around him, and the walls seemed to bend and warp like the entire room was folding in on itself. The creature's form began to solidify, and as it did, its shape became clearer, long, clawed fingers stretching toward him, a gaping maw filled with teeth that seemed to stretch on forever, and a body that was a grotesque amalgamation of shadow and flesh. It was the very embodiment of terror, a manifestation of everything the forbidden gospel had promised. "You think you can escape?" it crooned, its voice like grinding stone. "The truth is never free. It always demands a price." Ambrosio stumbled backward, but his legs gave way beneath him. His vision blurred, the room spinning as the creature's form grew larger, swallowing the space around him. He could feel the walls pressing in, the shadows reaching for him, pulling him closer. "You will never be free of it," the voice murmured. "Once you have seen the truth, it consumes you. It becomes you." The book. He had to get to the book. It was the key, the only way to stop this nightmare from consuming him. But the shadows were too fast. They wrapped around his body, tightening with each passing second, squeezing the life out of him. And then, as if by some twisted miracle, Ambrosio's hand brushed against something cold, something solid. He reached out desperately, grabbing the pedestal where the book had once rested. The pedestal had not moved, though the book was gone. What remained, however, was a small, obsidian object, a key carved with the same symbols that had tormented him. The moment his fingers touched the key, a wave of energy surged through him, blasting the creature back. It screeched in rage, its form flickering like a broken reflection in a mirror. The shadows recoiled, but they were not gone. The key, it was the final piece of the puzzle, the last tether that could hold back the darkness. But the creature was not finished. Ambrosio held the key tightly, his heart racing, his mind barely clinging to the last shreds of his sanity. The book, the key, the gospel, they were all part of a greater plan, something older than even the Vatican itself. And if he didn't act now, if he didn't destroy the gospel once and for all, he would be lost to the shadows forever. But the whispers were growing louder, the darkness closing in around him again. "You cannot escape," the creature's voice whispered. "You have already read the words. The truth is inside you now." Ambrosio had no choice. He had to burn the gospel, destroy it so that no one else would ever suffer the same fate. But even as he turned to flee, he knew that it would never truly be over. The gospel would find another. And when it did, the darkness would rise once more. As Ambrosio sprinted through the twisting corridors of the Vatican, the echoes of the whispers filled his mind, a constant, gnawing presence that would haunt him forever. The forbidden knowledge was within him now, and there was no turning back. The next day, Father Ambrosio was found, alone and trembling, wandering the halls of the Vatican in a state of madness. He was muttering to himself, his eyes wide with terror, speaking of shadows and creatures from beyond the veil of reality. He could no longer recognize his surroundings. The forbidden gospel had claimed him, and it was only a matter of time before it claimed another. Thank you very much and see you all in the next video. Love you guys.